As for its benefit academically, then the correct view is that it benefits dhun. It benefits distal knowledge. So we have primary knowledge and subsidiary knowledge. Both are relevant. And when it comes to acting in accordance with them, we're going to act in accordance with both. But as far as qualifying the rank of it, qualifying the quality of it, then the ahadith that are ahad, the sunnah that is ahad, it falls under the category of being subsidiary, or distal. And the people of knowledge, ahlul ilm, they have mentioned, scholarship has mentioned, that even a narration that is at the level of ahad, that is at the level of singular source narrations, when we have other supporting evidences, it can still be raised to the level of ilm yaqini, to the level of certain knowledge or primal knowledge, from distal to primal. And this is going to begin veering somewhere outside of our scope, but we have to at least expose ourselves to this discussion so that we know that it exists, and perhaps what our palate for the field of hadith as a study, or the science of hadith as a study. A person may say, okay, well, what's the relevance of all this, right? Why this entire discussion? Well, it becomes relevant, of course, in the science of hadith, but from the perspective of fiqh and the perspective of aqidah. Even from the perspective of our understanding and belief in the Quran. You say how? Okay. From the perspective of fiqh, when we are looking at sunnah as an evidence, as we are now in the history of Islamic law, we're looking at sunnah as an evidence, as it exists in Shariah. Then with the usuliyun, with legalists, you have what's called the Jamhur view, and then you have the Hanafiya view. The Jamhur view is the majority view, meaning the view of the Hanabila, the Malikiya, and the Shafi'iyya. The Hanbali madhab, the Shafi'i madhab, and the Maliki madhab. Because the majority of the time, when it comes to the field of usul al-fiqh, of legal theory, these three madhabs will agree. Most of the time, not always, but most of the time they will agree in the principles of law and how we understand what an evidence is and how we extract verdicts from that evidence. They have the same methodology most of the time. That's called the Jamhur view. Then we have the Hanafiya view, and it's the view of the Ahnaf. We're speaking in the field of usul al-fiqh and legal theory right now. With the Hanafiya, it is commonplace that their approach to evidences and how they extract rulings from the evidences has a tendency to differ with the Jamhur. Not always, but commonplace. Now, when we are speaking to this issue of mutawatir and ahad, the Hanafiya will make certain distinctions. Like, for example, you may have heard of the terms wajib and farad, that both mean obligatory. Yet, we may have also heard that with the Ahnaf, they make some type of distinction between wajib and farad. And we're like, okay, well, they're both obligatory, so how can you make a distinction one between the other? The distinction that they're making is something that the evidences prove is obligatory, but the quality of the evidence that is proving it is mutawatir. If the quality of the evidence that is proving this obligation is mutawatir, they're going to say that's farad because it's established with a multiple source evidence for its obligation. And when the evidence for this obligation is ahad, they're going to say that this now benefits distal knowledge, okay? That it's of a high quality, but a lower quality than the multiple source narrations. It's a singular source narration. You say, okay, well, what's the benefit of that? Okay, well, if we are in a situation where we have to when we have two texts that seem to be objecting one to the other, in our perception of those two texts, not in reality, because in reality is no contradiction, but in our understanding, they appear to be saying different things. This one is saying this, that one is saying that. We attempt to harmonize between these two texts and join them in their meaning some way, find a connection between the two. Maybe it's a situation. This hadith means that situation, and this hadith means another situation. So we harmonize between them, possibly. If we are not able to do that, we may then seek to date the two of them. And if we can date one before the other, then the latter one may be abrogating the one before it. Okay? If we can put some type of time frame to it. Or if we can't do that, now we enter into what is called tarjih, or preponderance, where we're not able to harmonize between them, and we can't date either one to abrogate one for the other, but we still have to do something with these texts because we have to act in accordance with something, and a ruling has to be placed somewhere. So now we look at which evidence is the stronger evidence. Both may be sahih, both may be acceptable evidence. But now, when one is at the level of mutawatir and the other is at the level of ahad, one is at the level of multiple source and the other is at the level of singular source, now we're going to take the multiple source evidence over the singular source evidence, for example. Okay, so the Hanafiya are making this type of a distinction between fard and wajib. Okay, they will also do something similar in when they make the distinctions for karaha, when they make the distinctions for that which is discouraged or disliked. And with them, they have the karaha that is tanzihi, and they have the karaha that is tahrimi. And we won't go into that. They make these distinctions, but now they look at haram now, above and beyond that. And now, whether we're at the level of haram or high level makruh is also now premised upon whether the evidence for this thing being displeasing to Allah is mutawatir or ahad. So then they have to make this distinction. This is in fiqh. It becomes relevant to know this and be able to make these distinctions scholastically. In the areas of aqidah, in the areas of theology, well, this is where and we have to be careful with our wordage here. But this is where many of the Orthodox Muslims, many of the Sunni Muslims come into conflict, or I should say, or where there is conflict that exists, for example, with the Maturidiyya, with the Asha'ira, with the Mu'tazila, for example, because of the fact that in their theology, they are making these distinctions with the evidences, Sunnah, Hadith, between Mutawatir and Ahad. And with the Asha'ira, with the Maturidiyya, with the Mu'tazila, they will posit that in matters of Aqidah, in matters of theology, then the evidences that are Ahad are not to be considered at all, or are only to be considered with the level of rigor. Okay? So now, things that are commonplace to you and I, they would place into the category of questionable, or it's not obligatory to believe it. Like what you asked, like all the ahadith that we have about the events that take place in the grave and the reward and punishment that takes place in the grave. Ahadith ahad. These are ahadith that are singular source narrations. So then these particular denominations that we've mentioned will either disbelieve in it altogether and say there is no punishment in the grave and there are no events that occur in the grave, or they will say it's not obligatory to believe in it, or they will add another level of rigor before they accept it. Okay. Likewise, seeing Allah on the day of resurrection, the ahadith we have for this also fall in the category of ahad, of singular source narrations. Even though these ahadith about the grave and about seeing Allah on the day of resurrection, they fall under the category of sahih, of being sound, at the highest level of being sound. Many of these ahadith are also collected in Bukhari and Muslim, yet they will apply this distinction and then determine what they will accept or will not accept. Whereas you and I, or our approach to the orthodoxy of our theology, of our aqidah, we are going to say, as long as it is an acceptable hadith, as long as it is a sound hadith, we know this came from the Prophet ﷺ, we know that he said it, we know that he informed us of it. So then we will say we are going to believe in it, regardless of whether it is mutawatir or ahad, because the Prophet ﷺ has said it. Okay? So understanding these distinctions, this is where this comes into play. And the ahad narrations, or the singular source narrations, they are further divided into three categories, which are mashhur, aziz, and gharib. But we can enter into these particulars next week, inshallah ta'ala.